You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story. Like and subscribe for more.
Hi, Homeworthy. I'm Megan, and welcome to my Alexandria, Virginia home. Come on in. My name is Megan Hopp Patel, and I am an interior designer and founder of Megan Hopp Design. We work on residential spaces here in the Washington, D.C. area, in New York City, and all over the country virtually. I have always loved interior design for as far back as I can remember. My first sort of entry point into the design world was definitely through garage sailing. I grew up in California where the weather was pretty good most of the year, which meant year-round garage sales. And every Saturday I would get my little Ziploc bag of $1 bills ready and wake up at 6 a.m. so we would be first to the sale. And I bought an 8-piece dining set when I was 13 years old, and luckily my parents let me store it in the garage until I was in college and had a use for it. So I was constantly, redesigning and recalibrating my bedroom as much as I could, but obviously, had not a lot of financial means to do so. So secondhand things were absolutely at the start of my design journey. I am still a garage sale lover, estate sale lover, thrift store lover. While beautiful curated antiques are, wonderful and enticing, nothing beats a $2 find. So, I am in my happiest place when I am in a thrift shop or at a garage sale. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, which is a town just outside of Washington, D.C., sort of a D.C. suburb. But it's a really old town with a lot of beautiful historical architecture, a lot of history, sort of a tourist destination in and of itself. I came here sort of on a whim during the pandemic, peak pandemic, when people who were living in New York City were sort of scrambling to figure out where to go and what to do. My husband and I were living in a 600 square foot apartment in Brooklyn, and the only door in the entire apartment was to the bathroom. And so when we had to get on a video chat or whatnot, one of us would be sitting on the toilet and the other would be in the living room. So that wasn't very tenable, and we were looking for places to land. And once it became clear that we didn't need to be in commuting distance, at least for a while, of the city, we decided to come to Alexandria, where we had a good group of friends. There was a lot more space. You could get, more for your money, frankly. And it felt like a good place to be. Fast forward, the pandemic was still going on. We got married, we had a baby, and it felt like, let's extend our stay and maybe even buy a house. So we ended up purchasing a home in the same neighborhood as some of our really good friends. It's a colonial style townhouse, but it was built in the 60s. So it's old, but not super old. And it's a lot bigger than, say, a house built in 1750. So for modern kind of functional purposes, it has that perk as well. I participated in a Bravo design competition show a few years back called Best Room Wins. I never really expected to be competing on television, so that was definitely something that I was going into, really green and not knowing what to expect. I will say, my main commentary about the experience when asked about it is like, how real is it? How real is it to be on a Bravo reality show? And truly they were like, here's your rental car, you have 4 days, go. I expected so much more manipulation behind the scenes and setup, and it was a true competition. So, but I had a really, really positive experience, a wonderful crew and producer, and the family that I was designing for, couldn't have, received sort of better teammates in that regard. It was really intense. It was pretty stressful. I was proud of the space I did, glad I won, but I don't see myself competing on television in the future. Welcome to my foyer. It's not huge, but I've never had a foyer before, so it feels like a lot to me. The sort of inspiration or starting point for this space in particular was, of course, the wallpaper. That's really the starting point for every space I designed, but I felt like it was also the starting point for the entire home. I knew I wanted to do something really graphic. I knew I wanted to do blue and white because I love blue and white. And I knew I wanted to do something stripey because that is also a favorite thing. So I found this wallpaper. It's a grass cloth. It's not a classic stripe. It has a little bit of a mix-up with the vertical and the horizontal lines. But it really was kind of the first decision I made in the entire space, and I sort of took it from there. With that, when I first moved in, it was like dark, 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 dark. So it was a black door, it was like a dark slate floor, and so I just knew I wanted to like brighten everything up. There's not a ton of natural light in this little nook right here. The floor is, sort of a standard tile, very classic, not hard to find, but because of that, I was able to sort of source it at kind of a big box store for a really reasonable price as to something more expensive. But the impact, I think, is huge, because before it was sort of just this like dark pit that one fell into, and now you walk in and it's this really bright pop. And then it also really lets the wallpaper do its thing. It doesn't compete with that. There's not a ton of space for furniture in here, but a nice little nook for a console and a mirror, somewhere to, drop your keys, drop your stuff, look at your face, before you exit the house. This console has kind of a fun story. It's just an old CB2 piece, but it's something that I bought for a former client back in New York, like, I don't know, 8 years ago or something like that. And she ended up becoming a really good friend, and she moved to a different space, and she was like, hey, do you want this console? I know you always really liked it and it's not available anymore. And so she helped me carry it 15 blocks from her apartment to mine. And it's just like a really nice reminder of her. So yeah, that's sort of the foyer, and we can kind of head on over to the left into the kitchen. So the reality of my home buying journey is that there was some drama along the way. We had agreed to purchase a home through a private sale that was another home in the neighborhood while I was pregnant. And about 4 days before I went into labor, the seller pulled out, and we were in a position where all of our stuff had already been packed and was in storage. I'm smiling about it now, but at the time, you can imagine it was incredibly stressful and hardly ideal. So we were in a total state of flux, but also just trying to focus on like having a healthy child and, getting through that. But pretty much immediately after, we started hitting up open houses again. So my son's like first sort of social interactions were all with realtors and going to open houses, within the first week of his life, essentially. So as this house in the same neighborhood became available, we just jumped on the opportunity to see it as fast as we could. And the sellers were just really awesome people who kind of, weren't looking to squeeze every last thing out of us and just wanted to make a fair deal, and were able to, sort of sell it to us rather quickly. And the house was in great shape. They took beautiful care of it. It wasn't my aesthetic in terms of the design decisions that they had made, but I could appreciate how well the maintenance had been, and I could just instantly visualize how quickly and easily I could kind of shift the narrative of the home and from a design perspective. And so, it was an opportunity that we couldn't pass up. As you can see here, we just stepped through a baby gate. When you live in a townhouse with a toddler, you invest, half your life savings in baby gates. You need them at every turn, so you will notice a lot of those in the home. Right here I have something that's kind of fun. It's a menu from the night my husband and I got engaged. My husband is not really the most surprise-oriented, kind of celebratory in a cheesy kind of way sort of person. So I thought that I had a very clear understanding of how our engagement was going down. I kind of thought we like already were engaged. But he surprised me with this like whole trip, and our friends flew in and our family. And it was amazing. So, you know, it's a cool memory. And then right below it is where we put our mail. So, you know, practical and a nice memory. The kitchen was maybe my greatest challenge, but also feels like my greatest triumph in the redesign of this home. I knew it wasn't in the budget by any means to just like start from scratch, do a gut reno, etc. I also personally don't love super modern kitchens. Like my dream kitchen is from like 1935 and has like built-ins galore and tile countertops and is just like really charming. This kitchen was like a super bizarre mix of old and new. You know, they had done the new granite countertops and stainless appliances, but, you know, original cabinets from 1969. So it was just very disjointed to me, and just, you know, had a lot of fixtures that I was not a fan of. So I sort of landed on what I knew I could do and could afford, which was like paint and wallpaper and lighting primarily. So I decided to kind of try and make all the gray in the space with the backsplash tile and the countertops feel less gray and more grayish, you know, a little warmer, a little more creamy. So it felt less harsh, less sterile. So the cabinets used to be a really stark white. I painted them a much kind of softer, warmer color. It's called French Canvas. It's from Benjamin Moore. I had them professionally painted, like real deal, sand them down off-site, you know, spray them, and that made all the difference. So it was definitely an investment, but you know, versus me kind of, you know, roller and paintbrush, which I have done many times. Don't get me wrong, also a good way to go. But this was something I was excited to do. And I think they turned out great. And I kind of love that they're original. Swapped the hardware, original hinges though. I thought those were cute. And then, oh, the other thing I did in here that I felt very proud of myself for thinking up was this hood. So this was not original when we moved in. There was this hyper modern stainless glass hood above the stove that just looked absurd, frankly. It just was so out of place, not my style at all. But I didn't want to like spend the money and also just kind of like throw the baby out with the bathwater, or however you say it, on a perfectly good working hood. So I was able to kind of work with my contractor and carpenter to build around the existing hood and create this sort of facade that matches the cabinets, to create something, you know, much prettier, much more seamless. I think it looks like it's original to the cabinets. Was so happy with how it came out. And then, you know, it's sort of a small kitchen, but again, coming from like my past life of New York City living, it feels like pretty enormous to me that I can, you know, walk from one side of the room to the other. We even have space in here for a small kitchen dining table, which feels like straight out of a sitcom to me, and I really enjoy. This is this is the first piece of furniture I bought off of Facebook Marketplace in the Washington, D.C. area. So this will always hold a special place in my heart. I got it for $50. It's really cool because it has this sort of enamel tabletop, and this actually lifts up, and then it has leaves that pull out, and so you can make it even bigger. So yeah, I've used it as a desk. I'm using it as a breakfast table. You know, you could use it for a lot of things. I think it's really charming. Really love it. Chairs I got at Goodwill for like $3 each, you know, can't go wrong there. And these are my most favorite bamboo shades that I recommend to like everyone on the internet and many of my clients. You can get them on overstock.com, and they are wildly affordable, and you can order them by the inch. And I think that they look great. They come down super easy, no cords. And that is my ringing endorsement for my favorite bamboo shades. I get asked a lot what my personal design aesthetic is, and it always feels like a very challenging question to answer, but what I've landed on is a sophisticated circus. I really like to try and use as much pattern and color as possible. I don't shy away from that. I like to mix a lot of new and old things, a lot of really interesting shapes and textures, but I never want anything to feel thematic or like a joke. So, I like to take things just to the line of feeling, like super bold and really leaning into design decisions without it becoming kind of, silly or over the top. Leaving the kitchen, we are in the dining area. This is one of, I think, the cooler pieces in the house. This was another thrift store find found at the Salvation Army. It was a monster to attempt to get out of the Salvation Army and into my home, but well worth the effort, I would say. I was looking at pieces like this online, these sort of more curated vintage sites, and they were going for well over $1,000. And I got this for $200, so I feel really good about that. But it's really nice because it's able to house my milk glass collection. And for those of you who are not familiar with milk glass, this is milk glass. It's white glass, very mid-century. Most of this actually comes from my grandmother, who's since passed. She was like the best woman in the world to me. And every year she would kind of like give me a piece or two. And I never had anywhere to put it. And so it was sort of always like tucked away or living at my parents' house in California. So it was really cool to move into a space that like had somewhere to put a piece like this to put things on display. And then just like layered in are other things that I found at either thrift stores or, were gifts. This was another piece from my family. Yeah, and I think it's just sort of, this really makes me feel like a grown-up. I'm like, oh, here are the nice pieces, So that's been really fun. Moving into the dining area, again, like the running theme is like, never thought I'd have a dining table, so let alone one with an extension that you could, sit like 8 to 10 people at. I wasn't really sure initially kind of what type of piece I wanted to do here. I had one of these dining chairs right here, which are these caned chairs. You can get them, sort of several different vendors, a very iconic style, which I had been using as a desk chair for a really long time in previous apartments, and I loved it, and they're super comfortable. I use them in client projects all the time too. So I was like, okay, well, I want to use what I have. That's like a big kind of sort of philosophy I would say I live by, is like, well, how can we make what we have work, as opposed to just starting from scratch. So I actually kind of started with the dining chairs, and then I just love a sort of like faux bamboo, Chippendale, tortoisey, like all of those things. That kind of mid-century style is something that I'm really attracted to. So I found this table secondhand. This was more of an antique-y kind of thing, so it wasn't a super good deal, but it was like way more affordable than buying something new. And I just, I love to buy secondhand. And then I was able to kind of, round out the end chairs, or at least right now end chair right here, with this piece that's an old restoration hardware chair, but also again, running theme, got it secondhand. And then, over here is where my son sits, so he's at the head of the table in his high chair for now. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing. We have dinner here every night. I love that it's sort of like in and out of the kitchen with ease. It feels, not too formal, but also like an event. And that's the dining space. And then all in the same room, we move into our living area. And the kind of design theme or sort of goal within this home and within this room specifically was that I wanted it to feel in line with the architecture of the home. I didn't want to come in and like kind of just ignore what was happening around me and design a space that was just, coming out of my brain without paying attention to my surroundings. A lot of my work for clients is a bit more modern, but this home is a colonial style home, and I didn't ever really imagine myself living in a colonial style home, but here I am, so let's embrace it. So I wanted to create a space that felt like colorful and lively and pattern forward, but not fighting against, the real skeleton of the home. Again, I started with the wallpaper. I am a real fan of a block print. That is something that I am always attracted to in terms of, aesthetic and pattern. And so I was like, okay, we're gonna do that space in here. But because all the rooms are kind of connected to one another, I knew that everything had to play really nicely in terms of all the different patterns I was using. So, there's one point in the home where I think you can see like 4 different wallpapers all in one spot. So, I had already selected the entry wallpaper. This one was kind of selected on top of that. And then if you look up, we have the grass cloth ceiling, which turned out to be by far one of the best decisions I made in sort of the redesign of this space. I think it makes the home feel like just so much cozier, and it creates this sort of like architectural feature and element without actually having to like add any architecture, It wasn't the easiest to install. I say that like I did it myself. I did not. A professional did it. But it just like turned out so wonderful, I think. And it's something that like people comment on when they come to visit as, just something they would never think to do, but they think is so cool. The lighting in this space, I would say, is something that I really kind of splurged on. With furniture and decor, I could really go secondhand a lot of the time. But with lighting, I had some fixtures in mind that were pieces I had used, time and time again with clients, and just like had in the back of my heart as something that I so wanted to use in my own home, but could never really justify the price on in rentals prior. These lights right here, it's called the Clark Flush Mount. They are just like some of my absolute favorites. They just look like a golden egg to me, and who doesn't like a golden egg? So, I was really excited to kind of put those up. There wasn't any lighting in the ceiling here initially, so I think that was a really nice kind of addition to the space as well. This little table and chairs right here, now used by my son, initially was used by me, and generations prior, it was actually built by my great-great-grandfather for my great-grandmother when she was a little girl, and has just been passed down through each generation. I feel like really lucky that my mom is quite good at sort of saving everything and sending it my way. And so, it's just been fun to watch him sit in the same chair that like so many people have sat in prior. And, I think it also is like, from a design perspective, a lot more interesting and charming than say like, just something plasticky that you would just grab, off the internet or something. So really happy to have that in the home. And then moving over here to the fireplace area, we decided we did not want to put a TV in this room and just kind of like contain our TV watching to like one, full-on space. So, went for a piece of art above the fireplace instead. This is a print that I've used in like the last 3 homes that I have lived in. I think art is very complicated in terms of size and scale and price, and it's something that I deal with clients all the time. Teeny tiny art is usually not the solution for a lot of spaces when it comes to, building an interior, but it's a hard nut to crack because, I'm certainly not going to be spending $5,000 on a piece of art. So I'm a big fan of framing like posters or, sort of inexpensive prints. And that's what this is. So this is essentially, like an artist's photograph, and it's just a poster. The framing costs more than the print itself. But, ultimately I think you're left with like a really nice looking piece that feels like very thoughtful and customized, but for a fraction of the price. And then as we move over here, this is our sort of bar area. This bar cabinet is cool because it's on wheels, so you can kind of fully roll it around, and the back is completely finished. And then the top of the bar opens up. So essentially you can turn it into like a working bar in your home if you want to, like, you know, really create the experience. But this was a piece that I got at an outlet store of a major retailer. And the doors had become unattached. So it was sort of in pieces. So we were able to get it, you know, for not very much. And then our friend, who's very handy, helped put the doors back on as sort of a, you know, very lovely gesture. So, you know, again, like, in case it hasn't, you know, come across, like, the theme of my personality is kind of, you know, trying to turn garbage into gold and make it work, and, you know, kind of a little bit of labor goes a long, long way. And then as we move into here, you know, I want to talk about like this window and mention these curtains, because these curtains are kind of, I think, like the eyes of the space. They are, you know, window treatments can be so wildly expensive and complicated, and they're really hard to do right. And I was looking for solutions to have like what I think is a really substantial, you know, which I feel like I achieved with this drapery look, but, you know, do it in a clever way, do it in a way where, you know, I wasn't spending half my budget on my window treatments. And I came across a company called Pepper Home, which is an online retailer where you can order custom curtains and pillows and things like that, you know, for a lot less than if you were using a more traditional service. And you can, you know, sort of customize the top. So I did a pinch pleat at the top. I added this sort of velvet border tape right here. And then, you know, this is not a standard length that these curtains need to be, but I could order them so that they were like absolutely perfect, just dust the floor. Always want your curtains to just dust the floor. And I just think they turned out so great. And I, you know, I'm just such a fan. When asked what I love most about my home, you know, there are a lot of things, but I will say what comes to mind immediately is the fact that we can fit a king-size bed and an enormous dresser in our bedroom, which was just something that never even felt in the question in Brooklyn or New York. You know, just the sheer square footage just feels enormous, and something that I really hadn't even considered. You know, when we left New York City, it wasn't really planned, and it wasn't really something we had, you know, foreseen in the near future. So when all of a sudden you're considering a living situation where you can fit a, you know, legitimate dining table, and you have more than one toilet in your home, and, you know, suburban living, it's just a level of sort of like comfort and ease that I can't say that I hate. So as we head upstairs, you know, same wallpaper as the foyer. I think it's just like so dynamic going up the stairs with these super high ceilings. Again, it has the nice grass cloth texture. So let's head on up. And coming into the primary bedroom, you know, here's that king-size bed I was mentioning, which I am a big believer in. You know, some people say, like, I'll sleep when I die. I'm like, no, I will sleep right now, as much as you can with a toddler. But so having a big, nice bed is very important to me, and it's, you know, just brings me so much joy. And also with that, you know, larger nightstands with actual storage, and, you know, these are all just things that I just never would have had in a smaller New York City apartment, that have been really like a lovely thing, especially in pandemic times where you're, you know, living your whole life at your home. Also, speaking of big, this dresser right here was a secondhand find from Restoration Hardware. And It is like the biggest dresser I've ever owned. It's the most storage I've ever had. And it was very, very difficult to get upstairs, but we found some movers who were just like absolute superheroes, and they were so skilled and so strong. And they did it, and it was like such a triumph. So I'm grateful to them every day when I put something in the drawer. This is one of my favorite decor pieces. I have a few of these lamps. They're sort of these vintage alabaster lamps. Again, like not so hard to find, but they sell for, you know, like a considerable amount of money. But you can find them at thrift stores or garage sales, etc. So, you know, got this one for like $10. And I just think that like it's so beautiful, and I really love kind of collecting them. So in terms of the color palette of this space, I really wanted it to feel light and airy and kind of, you know, spa-like in a way. Not that I'm like going to spas or anything in my life, but, you know, I wanted my space to feel, you know, really sort of free and crisp, as opposed to something more dramatic or more dense. But I really didn't want it to be like boring, sterile, white on white on white on white. So I kind of landed on this like sagey green ivory sort of combination. And again, you know, the wallpaper was a really good starting point for this space. It's sort of textured. It really kind of creates a different sound quality in the room because of that. And I think it's, you know, it's like neutral, but it's like a colorful pattern neutral, which, you know, I think is really the way to go. And then I could kind of bring the green in, you know, obviously with these really nice velvet drapes that are very like rich and textured, also from Pepper Home. You know, they just obviously like do wonders for the windows. You know, same bamboo shades that I love as always. And then, you know, just sort of pops of green with the pillows and, you know, other little accents in the space. This piece of art is an illustration of the restaurant Joseph Leonard in the West Village. And it is where I have had many exciting moments in my life, but also it's where my husband and I had our first date. So he gave that to me as a gift, and it's just nice to have a little piece of like the old neighborhood in the home, as well as, you know, obviously like sort of a pivotal memory in my life, I guess. So now we're gonna head all the way down to the basement to check out the den/office. So follow me. Okay, so moving into the basement, we're also sort of moving into another decade and era. The rest of the home has really traditional sort of finishes and architectural details like crown molding, dental molding, etc. This room did not. Sort of much more streamlined, much more kind of indicative of a cookie cutter mid-century build. And so I wanted to kind of, you know, again, follow the architecture. The other component of that is that my husband loves mid-century modern design. You know, as lovely as this chair is, it's not my go-to, but I did really want to create a space that honored that for him. And this is, you know, sort of the hangout area of the home. We also have a designated workspace in this room. And so I really thought that it was a great opportunity to kind of do my version of like a mid-century wood paneled basement. So obviously kind of the most striking thing in the room would be the walls and, you know, sort of part of the ceiling here. This is a wood veneer wall covering. So it is actually wood, but it does go up kind of like a wallpaper. I think it is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. It's something that I had had a sample of for a really long time and had pitched to a lot of different clients. It's from a company called Tebow, and everybody was always like, nah, I don't know, that seems a little weird, that seems a little crazy. And I was like, of course, it's going to be me who gets to use it. So, I think that it really, just brightened the space so much while also creating something that was just like super stylized, really special and unique. And I love it. In this room, we really wanted it to be like super family friendly, really cozy. I recarpeted the entire space and did all furniture that like a child could throw their body on and seemingly not injure themselves. This is a sofa that I use with clients often. It is a slipcover sofa, machine washable, super easy to maintain. So, people will always ask me like, you got a white couch with a kid? Like, what are you thinking, But I also love the aesthetic of a white couch, and there is nothing that can achieve that other than an actual white couch. So I think a washable slipcover is by far, sort of the smartest way to go. And it's a sofa that is sort of tried and true in my book. I'd used it many times and I knew what I was getting. So I was excited to kind of implement that into my own home. So then moving over here, this is sort of the miracle of white paint. The wall and the fireplace were untouched when we moved in. So it was sort of this like dark wood, dark gray painted walls, red brick fireplace. I heard someone once say like, everyone has this preconceived notion that you need to be really precious about brick, and like brick from the 60s is not really something to feel bad about painting. So, definitely went with that kind of mentality and, threw some paint on top of it. And it just like completely changed the lighting in this space. We do get pretty good natural light in this room because it is on the ground floor. But, it was just like a dark cavern before, and now, it feels really sunny and like a really nice place to be and hang out. And then as I come this way, there was sort of this perfect little nook to set up a nice workstation. This is sort of a line of furniture from Crate and Barrel that, again, I'm familiar with from my work, and it's something that I knew I would like and knew I did like. And it just so happened to be like the perfect width for this space. So it feels almost custom, but it's not. It's Crate and Barrel. So, this is a great workspace, and it's also nice living in a townhouse. You can kind of be on very different floors and not hear each other so much, but you're also, right next to the windows, so you get really good natural light as well. So, coming up with how to lay out this space really did stem from the fact that I wanted to put the desk area into this defined nook. So the dominoes sort of fell after that decision was made. I knew I didn't want to put my TV above the fireplace just for practical reasons, and I don't know, it just didn't feel like the right thing to do. So, the question was sort of, which wall do I put it on? We could put it on this wall, which is how the previous owners had it. But I decided I wanted to kind of float my sofa in the middle of the room facing this wall with the back to the fireplace, which maybe isn't the most kind of like logical thing one would initially think to do, but I like that it defines the space as sort of, this is the den seating area, that is the workspace, and the fireplace kind of feels like it lives in both worlds. And it is a working fireplace, so, if and when we want to do fires, we can. Home to me means a place that you have ownership of and that you feel most yourself in. Ideally we walk out into the world and we have the ability to kind of keep this through line of who we are and what we stand for, and have a consistency in how comfortable we are. But the reality is that you got a lot of obstacles thrown your way as you sort of like move through the world. And I think coming home is a safe space that you can create that's just really representative of you, that really caters to your preferences and your needs, and that can just kind of like give you that sigh of relief and that place to, be the real purest form of yourself.
Thanks for watching. For more Homeworthy content, be sure to like and subscribe.